In the quiet suburbs of Willow Bend, the Wright family's backyard glimmered under the warmth of a golden Sunday afternoon. Daniel Wright stood by the grill, smoke curling around his face, his expression calm, too calm. His wife, Claire, arranged plates on the picnic table while their children, Noah and Lily, ran barefoot through the grass, their laughter carried by the wind. From the outside, it looked like a picture of perfection. The kind of scene people post online with the caption, "Family is everything." But behind the laughter, behind the gentle smiles, something darker lingered. Daniel's eyes followed every move Claire made. When she laughed too loud, he frowned. When she poured herself a second glass of wine, his jaw tightened. He reached for her hand, brushing it with calculated affection. "Careful, honey," he murmured. "You don't want to overdo it." Claire smiled faintly, her lips barely lifting. "It's Sunday, Dan. I think I'm allowed one more." The narrator's voice dips low, ominous. Every perfect picture hides a shadow, and for the Wright family, that shadow was about to consume them all. As evening fell, the laughter faded. Dinner plates lay forgotten in the sink, the smell of grilled chicken clinging to the air. Daniel sat in the living room, meticulously polishing the edges of his watch, his reflection cold in the metal. Claire tucked the children into bed, humming softly, a lullaby Daniel had once said he loved. But her voice trembled on the last note. When she came downstairs, she paused by the doorway, watching him. "You're quiet tonight," she said softly. Daniel looked up, smiling that same distant smile. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how lucky we are," he replied. "Not everyone gets what we have." She nodded, though her eyes told a different story. One of exhaustion, fear, and something close to resignation. The clock on the mantel ticked louder than usual. Outside, a breeze rustled the trees, brushing against the curtains like fingertips. Daniel stood, his movements slow, deliberate. "We should all get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow's a new week," Claire hesitated. "The kids have school projects to finish. Maybe I'll stay up and—" He stepped closer, his hand resting on her shoulder. Firm, possessive. I said, "It's time to rest." The light flickered once, then steadied. She didn't argue. She never did. Later that night, the neighborhood was quiet except for the hum of crickets and the occasional bark of a distant dog. At 11:47 p.m., a single scream shattered the silence, sharp, desperate, and unmistakably human. Then nothing. The next morning, the sun rose over a peaceful street. Birds chirped. The mail truck rolled by as if the world hadn't changed overnight. But inside the Wright house, breakfast plates sat untouched on the table, the back door left slightly ajar. By noon, the neighbors began to whisper. The Wrights' car was still in the driveway. The curtains hadn't moved all morning. When police arrived that evening, they found no signs of struggle. No blood, no forced entry. Just silence. The faint smell of earth drifted from the backyard, freshly disturbed. The narrator's voice fades in again, slow and deliberate. On that perfect Sunday, Daniel Wright smiled for the last family photo ever taken in that yard. By sunrise, the image of the perfect husband and father would dissolve, leaving behind one of the darkest crimes this town had ever known. A camera pans across the Wrights. Backyard, the swing set swaying gently in the wind, a garden shovel half buried in soil, its handle glinting in the sun. Then, the screen fades to black. Morning sunlight fell across the neat lawns of Maple Street, but something felt off. The Wright house, once the center of cheerful noise, was eerily silent. The mail piled up on the porch. The car sat unmoved. By Tuesday, the neighbors began to whisper. Margaret Lewis, the woman next door, was the first to call the police. "They never just leave," she told dispatch, her voice trembling. "Not without saying goodbye." When officers arrived, they found the front door locked. No sign of a break-in. Everything inside looked immaculate. Dishes stacked, furniture polished, even the beds made with perfect precision. Too perfect. The kitchen clock on the wall had stopped at 11:47 p.m., its second hand frozen in place. The family calendar still marked Sunday's date with one handwritten note below it. Family night. Detective Sarah Holden stood in the middle of the living room, taking in the scene. She was in her late 30s, sharp-eyed and calm, known for noticing what others missed. But here, something felt wrong on an instinctive level. The air too still. The silence too heavy. "Whoever cleaned this," she murmured to the officer beside her, "wanted us to think nothing happened." She moved through the room slowly. Claire's jewelry box sat open, untouched. The children's school books lay on the table, mid-assignment. In the master bedroom, the sheets were perfectly smooth, except for a faint indentation, as if someone had sat there recently. Then she saw them, faint, drying muddy footprints leading from the back door out toward the garden. Outside, the soil looked freshly turned near the old swing set. Holden crouched, brushing her fingers through it. "Get forensics here," she said quietly. "And dogs." The narrator's voice enters again, calm, chilling. In cases like these, time is everything. But at the Wright residence, time had already stopped, at exactly 11:47. By evening, local news vans lined the street. Reporters spoke in hushed tones, their breath visible in the cold air. Every camera was pointed at the same house, the one with no answers. Then, in an unexpected turn, Daniel Wright appeared, calm, clean-shaven, dressed in a crisp shirt. He stepped out from a neighbor's porch and walked straight toward the cameras. "Daniel Wright!" one reporter shouted. "Where is your family?" He smiled, a small, unsettling smile. "They're fine," he said softly. "We just needed a little space." "Did something happen on Sunday night?" another asked. Daniel tilted his head. "People love to imagine things. My family means everything to me. You'll see them soon." He looked directly into the camera. His voice didn't waver once. When Detective Holden saw the interview that night, she paused the footage at Daniel's face. His expression, blank yet deliberate, sent a chill down her spine. She replayed one part over and over again. "You'll see them soon." Those words didn't sound like comfort. They sounded like a promise, or a threat. The next morning, the official investigation began. Forensics confirmed traces of blood near the kitchen sink, cleaned but not completely gone. A piece of Claire's gold bracelet was found beneath the refrigerator. Detective Holden gathered her notes, the photo of the backyard soil clipped to the front. "We're not looking for a missing family," she said quietly. "We're looking for something buried." The narrator's tone drops to a whisper. In small towns, truth hides behind manicured lawns and white fences. But once the soil is disturbed, there's no going back. The camera lingers on the Wright's backyard as night falls. The swing creaks softly, a lone crow perched on its frame. Police floodlights glow across the garden, the earth waiting to give up its secrets. Before the screaming, before the headlines, before the quiet hole in the ground, there were months of warning signs. The kind that everyone saw but no one understood. It began in February, 3 months before the Wrights vanished. Claire's sister Julia remembered it vividly. "He wasn't always like that," Julia said in her interview. "Daniel used to make her laugh. But after he lost his job, something changed. He wouldn't tell anyone what happened. He just started." Watching her, the flashback unfolds in soft gray tones. Claire sits at her kitchen table, phone pressed to her ear, her voice low. "Julia, he's not himself anymore," she whispered. "He gets angry over nothing. If dinner's late, if the kids are loud. I don't even recognize him." "Maybe he's just stressed," Julia suggested gently. "You said things were rough at work." Claire hesitated, glancing toward the living room where Daniel's silhouette passed by. "That's just it. He hasn't gone to work in weeks. He leaves in the morning, but his briefcase is empty." The narrator's voice slips in softly. Daniel Wright had been laid off from his engineering firm after 15 years. But instead of telling his wife, he put on the same tie every morning, drank the same coffee, and drove nowhere. To Daniel, appearance was survival. Losing control meant losing himself. Days turned into weeks. Daniel became meticulous, obsessively so. The yard had to be trimmed every Sunday at exactly noon. The children's beds had to be made with military precision. Even Claire's laughter seemed to bother him, as though joy itself disrupted the image of perfection he was desperately trying to preserve. There were small moments, tiny cracks that widened with time. One night, Claire reached for his hand during dinner. "We'll get through this, Dan, whatever's going on." He pulled back slowly. "Whatever's going on," he repeated. "There's nothing going on. We're fine. Our family's fine." But the tremor in his voice betrayed the lie. He started checking her phone, questioning her errands, her friends, even her tone when she spoke to the children. Gaslighting became routine. "You're forgetting things again," he would say whenever she contradicted him. "You should see someone about that." Julia noticed the change too. When Claire stopped visiting, she drove over one afternoon unannounced. Daniel opened the door, smiling politely but blocking her path. "She's resting," he said. Julia frowned. "I just wanted to—" "I said she's resting," Daniel repeated, his voice colder this time. Then, softer. "You should call next time." The door closed with quiet finality. That night, Claire called her sister again, whispering through tears. "I'm scared, Jules. He watches me sleep. Sometimes he just stands there. I asked him once what he was doing, and he said he was making sure I was still breathing." Silence filled the line. The narrator's tone deepens, quiet, but chilling. Control. It's never loud. It starts in small gestures, checking, correcting, confining, until it becomes a cage no one else can see. By early April, Daniel's behavior turned ritualistic. He began digging in the backyard every evening, claiming he was starting a new garden. Claire told neighbors it helped him relax, though her forced laugh betrayed unease. Detective Holden would later write in her report, "Multiple neighbors witnessed Mr. Wright digging for several nights before the family's disappearance. They assumed it was landscaping. None thought to question it. The tension reached its breaking point one rainy Thursday. Claire found a letter hidden in Daniel's desk, a termination notice from his company dated 4 months earlier. The truth hit her like a blow. When he came home that evening, she confronted him. "You lied to me, Dan." His expression didn't change. "I protected you," he said quietly. "Protected me? By pretending? By lying? You don't understand," he snapped, stepping closer. "They wanted to humiliate me, but they can't take what's mine. Not you, not the kids, not this house." Claire backed away, her hands trembling. "Daniel, please, everything stays perfect," he said. "No matter what." The narrator's voice fades over the image of Claire standing in the doorway, her silhouette outlined by the porch light. It was the last argument the neighbors would hear. The next day, the Wrights smiled for the camera at a community picnic, the final photo ever taken of them alive. As the screen fades to black, the narrator whispers, "Perfection is a beautiful disguise. But when it begins to crack, the truth always seeps through." The faint sound of a shovel striking dirt echoes in the darkness. 2 nights before the Wright family disappeared, Claire made a phone call. It lasted less than 90 seconds, but it was enough to haunt a lifetime. Detective Sarah Holden sat in the small, dimly lit interview room, the faint hum of the overhead light filling the silence. Across from her sat Rebecca Lane, Claire's closest friend. Her hands shook as she clutched a crumpled tissue. "It was around 10 p.m., Rebecca began softly. "I was folding laundry when she called." Her voice, it wasn't like her. She sounded terrified. The narrator's tone darkens, threading emotion through every word. Claire Wright, once the picture of calm composure, now whispered into the phone as if the walls themselves were listening. "Rebecca," she said, "if anything happens to me—" "Don't believe him," Rebecca frowned, confused. "Claire, what are you talking about? What do you mean, don't believe him?" There was a pause, a faint rustle on the other end, then Claire's trembling voice again. "He says everything's fine, but it's not. The line cut off." Rebecca sat in silence for a moment, staring at her phone, unsure whether to call back. "I thought maybe they were fighting," she told the detective. "Married couples argue all the time." I didn't want to overstep. Detective Holden leaned forward slightly. "Did she ever call again?" Rebecca shook her head. "I tried the next morning, no answer." Then the news broke about them being missing. The narrator continues, voice threaded with regret. "In every case, there's a moment, a single choice, that separates tragedy from rescue. For Rebecca Lane, that moment was a missed call." Detective Holden replayed the voicemail logs, listening to the static, the faint sound of breathing, and a whisper barely audible. "He's watching." Her stomach tightened. "Run that through audio enhancement," she ordered the technician. "I want every sound isolated." Hours later, in the quiet of her office, Holden stared at the photograph of the Wright family, smiling, framed in sunlight. "Don't believe him," the voice echoed in her mind. In that instant, the case shifted from a missing persons investigation to something far darker. Through narration, we glimpsed Detective Holden's inner turmoil. She'd seen it before. The charming husband, the concerned interviews, the neat home hiding chaos. But this one felt different. Daniel Wright wasn't just concealing a crime. He was crafting a story, one so precise, so believable, it could make anyone doubt the truth. The next scene unfolds like a ghost replaying itself. Rebecca, 2 nights later, sits at her kitchen table watching Daniel's calm face on the evening news. "If anyone's seen my wife or kids, please," Daniel says smoothly, his voice cracking at the right moments. "Just bring them home." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "He looks so sincere," she said later. "I told myself I must have misunderstood her, that maybe she'd been emotional." But when Detective Holden showed her the recovered phone transcript, the final 10 seconds of the call, enhanced, Rebecca went pale. In the background, a man's voice could be heard faintly. "Why are you still on the phone?" Then a muffled thud. Then silence. Rebecca covered her mouth, tears spilling down her face. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He was there." The narrator's voice fades into quiet grief. When someone cries for help, we never imagine it's the last time they'll speak. But for Claire Wright, that whisper into the receiver was a confession wrapped in fear, and the only trace she left behind. Detective Holden rose from her chair, determination tightening her jaw. "Get me everything on Daniel Wright. Employment, finances, phone records. He's not the victim here." The camera pans out slowly, the sound of static blending with the faint echo of Claire's voice. "If anything happens to me, don't believe him." As the screen fades to black, the narrator's tone turns cold. The truth had been whispered. Now it was time to dig it up. By dawn, the once quiet cul-de-sac of Willow Creek was swarmed with flashing blue lights. Police tape stretched across the Wright property like a wound trying to hold itself together. Detective Sarah Holden stood at the edge of the yard, her breath visible in the cold morning air, watching the forensic team mark sections of the soil behind the house. What was once Daniel Wright's pride, his perfectly trimmed lawn, his backyard paradise, had become a crime scene. "It started with the smell," the narrator intones. "Neighbors thought it was a dead animal buried under the mulch. But death, when buried, never stays quiet for long." Officers moved methodically, guided by a cadaver dog whose sudden stop sent a chill through everyone watching. The handler raised a gloved hand. "We've got something." Detective Holden's stomach tightened. "Start digging." The first shovel struck earth. Then another. Mud gave way to something heavier, wetter, a scent that twisted in the wind. The cameras from local news stations zoomed in from the street as officers unearthed what no one wanted to see. A small hand. The crowd gasped. Someone screamed. By noon, the discovery was complete. 3 shallow graves laid side by side, the soil still damp and newly disturbed. Claire Wright, their son Jacob, their daughter Lily. The narrator's voice broke slightly, whispering through the scene. A mother. 2 children, all gone, all buried by the man they trusted most. Neighbors clung to each other as reporters shouted over one another. Was it Daniel Wright? Where is he now? Did anyone see him leave? Detective Holden turned away from the crowd and stared at the darkened house, curtains drawn, front door still half open. Inside, the scent of bleach lingered. The kitchen clock remained frozen at 11:47 p.m., the moment everything had stopped. She looked back toward the yard, whispering, "You didn't even dig deep enough." Her partner, Officer Reed, handed her a phone bagged in evidence. "Found this near the back fence." "It's Daniel's," Holden nodded grimly. "He's on the run." That afternoon, news outlets erupted. Every channel, every radio, every phone notification bore the same line: "Family man turns killer." Daniel Wright's photo, smiling, clean-shaven, blue eyes steady, flashed across screens nationwide. He had vanished without a trace. The narrator's tone grows reflective, like a ghost piecing together what remains. It's always the same photo they use. The husband in a family portrait, arms wrapped protectively around the people he'd destroy. Viewers stare at it and wonder, how does a smile like that hide such darkness? Detective Holden knew the story would spiral out of control. The public had already made up its mind, but she wasn't sure yet. Something didn't fit. She re-examined the scene as the forensics team finished collecting samples, the shovel, the soil layers, the position of the bodies. Claire's hand was still clutching something small, a folded piece of paper pressed into her palm. Holden carefully pried it open. Mud smeared across the ink, but 3 words were still visible. He said, "Run." Her pulse quickened. "Get this to analysis," she ordered quietly. As night fell, floodlights illuminated the backyard like a grim theater stage. Reporters camped outside. The once beautiful home now looked hollow, stripped of its illusions. Neighbors whispered about the Wrights, the perfect couple who never fought, the father who coached Little League, the mother who baked for school fundraisers. But now the whispers turned sharp. He must have snapped. He lost his job, didn't he? No one ever really knows what happens inside a house. The narrator's voice lowers, almost mournful. Behind closed doors, perfection can rot. And when it finally breaks, the world rushes to watch. Holden stood at the edge of the backyard, rain starting to fall again. The mud shimmered beneath the harsh lights. She thought of Claire's voice on that phone call. "Don't believe him," she exhaled slowly. "You were right, Claire," she whispered. "But I think he's still close." A motion sensor light flickered near the tree line, just once, then went out. Holden turned sharply, hand on her weapon, but saw nothing, only the steady hum of the rain and the distant sound of a news helicopter overhead. As the screen fades to black, the narrator speaks again, soft and haunting. 3 graves in a backyard. 1 man missing. But monsters don't disappear, they wait, a pause. Then the sound of shovels scraping earth echoes faintly. And sometimes, they dig again. In every story of violence, there's a clue, not in the weapon or the body, but in the words left behind. Detective Sarah Holden sat in Daniel Wright's dimly lit study, the faint scent of leather and dust clinging to the air. The room looked untouched, as though he'd simply walked out one day and never returned. On the mahogany desk sat a single object that didn't belong, a worn black journal. The first page bore his name in neat cursive. Daniel M. Wright. The handwriting was controlled, almost painfully precise. Holden slipped on gloves and opened to the first entry. March 4th. Claire says I've been distant. She doesn't understand the pressure of keeping this family safe. Perfection takes effort and obedience. The next few pages read like the reflections of a proud father. Notes about Jacob's baseball games, Lily's piano lessons, and Claire's garden. But as Holden flipped further, the tone began to shift, subtly at first, then sharply. March 28th. The voices come at night. They whisper when I sleep. They tell me to protect them from themselves. April 6th. Claire questions too much. She says I'm scaring the children. She doesn't see what I see. Purity, order, control. Holden's pen hovered over her notepad. "Voices," she murmured, her brow furrowing. Officer Reed leaned closer. "You think he was mentally ill?" Holden shook her head. "Maybe. But look at this." She flipped to another section, where the handwriting grew erratic, jagged. Ink bled through the pages. April 10th. I can't fail them. If I lose control, everything we've built will rot. They must rest to stay pure. Holden exhaled slowly. He's rationalizing murder, calling it mercy. The narrator's voice overlays the scene, filled with quiet dread. Daniel's journal was a map of a mind collapsing, or perhaps a confession written in code. In another entry, dated just a day before the disappearance, Daniel wrote, "The storm is coming. I hear it in the wind. They'll sleep peacefully tonight. The garden will bloom again." Holden closed the journal gently, as though afraid the words might spill out. "He planned it," she whispered. "Every word. He was leading up to that night." Reed frowned. "Then why the guilt in the earlier entries?" Holden thought for a long moment. "Because guilt is control. He needed to believe he was saving them, not destroying them." She stood, scanning the rest of the study. On the wall, several family photos hung in perfect alignment. Each frame was spotless, except one. The glass was cracked right across Claire's face. Holden stepped closer. Behind the photo, taped to the wall, was a folded sheet of paper, another page from the journal. If anyone finds this, tell them I tried. I tried to silence the noise, but it's stronger than me. They will thank me in heaven. The narrator continues softly. Guilt, control, justification. It's the holy trinity of a mind that confuses love with possession. Holden's jaw tightened. He didn't just snap, she said. He built up to it, piece by piece, and he believed he was right. Outside, thunder rumbled, echoing the storm that had once hidden his crime. Later that night, Holden sat in her car, reading the journal again under the glow of a flashlight. But one thing caught her attention, an odd code scrawled in the margins of the final page. AW knows, the garden isn't finished. Her pulse quickened. AW? Reed looked puzzled. Who's that? Holden didn't answer immediately. She turned the page, flipping through the initials that appeared in earlier entries, always beside phrases like the plan and the voice. He wasn't alone, she murmured. Someone else was in this with him. The narrator's tone drops to a whisper. A man who buries his family may be a monster, but a man who writes about it as prophecy might not be working alone. Holden closed the journal, her reflection caught in the cracked window pane. Outside, wind swept through the backyard crime scene. The earth still looked unsettled, like it could breathe. She whispered to herself, "Who are you, AW?" As the scene fades to black, the faint sound of a pen scratching paper echoes, a new entry being written somewhere unseen. She's getting close, just like Claire did. The narrator's tone is calm yet edged with disbelief, like someone recounting a story they still can't accept as real. When a man kills his family, the world looks for a motive. But sometimes the motive doesn't come from love or money. It comes from someone else. Detective Sarah Holden sat across from Lydia Harper in the cold, windowless interview room. Lydia's hands shook as she clutched a paper cup of coffee, the steam curling upward like smoke from something burning long ago. She was striking. Blonde hair tied tightly, mascara smudged under tired eyes. But her voice was small, barely more than a whisper. "I didn't know it would end like this," she said. "I swear I didn't," Holden leaned forward. "Start from the beginning, Lydia. How did you know Daniel Wright?" Lydia swallowed hard. "We worked together at the insurance office downtown. He was quiet, polite, the kind of man who noticed if you changed your perfume or wore a new pair of shoes. Everyone liked him." She hesitated, looking away, especially me. The narrator cuts in softly. "In every affair, there's a moment when boundaries blur, when a secret feels like safety instead of danger." Lydia continued, voice trembling. "It started small. Lunch breaks, late emails. Then one night he told me Claire didn't understand him anymore. He said she'd stopped loving him." Holden didn't respond, just watched her closely. Lydia's words spilled faster. "He said he wanted to start over, somewhere far away. He talked about buying land, building a new house. I thought he meant with me, but then he said something that scared me." Holden's tone sharpened. "What did he say?" Lydia met her eyes for the first time. "He said, sometimes to start fresh, you have to bury the past." I laughed. I thought he was being dramatic. But then he showed me this. She reached into her bag, hands trembling, and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. It was old, creased, and faintly smudged with dirt. Holden unfolded it slowly. It was a backyard layout, hand-drawn, meticulous, with 3 rectangular plots sketched in the center. Holden's stomach turned. "When did he give you this?" "About 2 weeks before they went missing," Lydia whispered. "He said it was part of his project, that the garden would be perfect soon." The narrator's voice overlaps, heavy with dread. Perfection. The word Daniel used like a prayer. To Lydia, it sounded poetic. To Claire, it became a death sentence. Holden stared at the drawing again, her fingers tracing the lines that matched the graves they'd found. "You didn't think to report this?" she asked quietly. Lydia's eyes filled with tears. "He was charming, Detective, gentle, you'd never think—" She shook her head. "I told myself he was just venting. He said he'd lost control once before, but he promised it wouldn't happen again." Holden's expression hardened. What do you mean, once before? Lydia hesitated, biting her lip. He told me. When Claire was pregnant with their second child, he pushed her during an argument. She fell. He said it was an accident, but the baby came early. He cried when he told me. Said he hated himself. The silence in the room felt suffocating. Holden finally stood. You didn't just know him, Lydia. You saw who he really was, and you looked away. Lydia's tears spilled over. I didn't want to believe it. The narrator returns, voice tightening. The truth about Daniel Wright wasn't buried in the backyard. It lived in the spaces between his words. In every excuse, every, I'm sorry, every woman who thought she could fix him. As Holden left the room, she clutched the blueprint tightly. The initials in the journal echoed in her mind. A.W. knows. The garden isn't finished. She stopped at the door. Lydia, she said quietly. Do you know anyone with the initials A.W.? Lydia's head lifted slowly, confusion flickering into fear. Why are you asking? Holden studied her carefully. Because Daniel wasn't working alone. And something tells me you know exactly who helped him dig. The light above flickered once, leaving Lydia's pale face trembling in the dark. Sometimes, the narrator whispers, the other woman isn't just the lover. She's the accomplice. Every monster has a breaking point. For Daniel Wright, that night began like any other. But it would end with the silence of a family that would never wake again. It was a Thursday, the night before Claire planned to take the kids to her mother's house. Neighbors remembered the faint glow of the dining room light, the clinking of silverware, the sound of laughter that didn't last long. Through police reconstruction and fragments from Daniel's confession, investigators pieced together the timeline of events. At 7:42 p.m., Claire texted her sister, "Dinner's ready. He's in one of his moods again." At 7:45, Daniel poured wine, his hands trembling. The toxicology report would later confirm a heavy sedative mixed into each glass, except his own. The narrator continues. For Daniel, it wasn't a spontaneous act. It was planned, quiet, deliberate, cruel. He told himself it would be peaceful, that they would all go to sleep, and the pain would end. In the dim light of the kitchen, Claire served the roast she'd made earlier that day. The children, Emma, age 6, and Caleb, age 4, fought over the last roll of bread. To anyone else, it was an ordinary family dinner. To Daniel, it was goodbye. He watched them eat, his heartbeat syncing with the ticking clock on the wall. Every second felt like a countdown he couldn't stop. When Claire asked what was wrong, he smiled, a thin, empty curve of his lips. Nothing, he said. Everything's fine now. At 8:11 p.m., the children began to grow drowsy. Claire noticed first. Daniel, what's happening? Her words slurred as her hand gripped the edge of the table. The wine glass tipped, spilling red liquid across the white tablecloth like a spreading wound. Daniel whispered, just rest. You'll understand soon. She tried to stand but collapsed, her vision blurring. He lifted her gently, whispering words he didn't believe. It's better this way. The reenactment fades, replaced by flashing police photos, the cold blue glow of the evidence room. Detective Holden narrates over the imagery. The sedative should have killed them quickly. But Claire woke up. It happened around 9:23 p.m. Daniel was in the living room dragging a tarp from the garage when he heard her voice, faint, terrified. Daniel? She stumbled into the hall, disoriented, one hand pressed to her head. When she saw the tarp, the shovel, the gloves, she understood. Claire screamed for the children. Her voice cracked through the still night, echoing beyond the walls of that perfect suburban house. What happened next was chaos. Police believe she ran for the door, but Daniel caught her by the arm. They struggled, crashing into the counter, shattering a dish. In his confession, Daniel said she called him a monster. I didn't mean to, he told investigators. She just wouldn't stop screaming. I wanted her to understand. The autopsy showed defensive wounds on Claire's hands and a fractured wrist. She fought until the end. After that, Daniel went to the children's room. Both were still asleep, the sedative finally taking hold. He stood over their beds for nearly 10 minutes before doing what he would later describe as a mercy. The narrator's voice trembles slightly, the tone shifting from detached to emotional. He called it mercy, The world calls it murder. By dawn, the house was silent. Daniel wrapped each body in bedsheets, white with small floral patterns, and carried them to the backyard. The soil was soft from the previous week's rain. He had already dug the holes days earlier under the guise of gardening. He placed Claire first, then the children, side by side. The neighbors later recalled hearing faint scraping sounds around 4 a.m., but assumed it was Daniel fixing the fence again. By sunrise, he had covered the graves, leveled the soil, and planted roses on top. He even watered them. When police found the garden weeks later, the flowers were in full bloom. Detective Holden's voice cuts through the reconstruction footage. He didn't run. He went to work the next morning, drank coffee, smiled at his co-workers. He even asked Lydia if she liked roses. The narrator's tone grows colder now, factual, final. When they searched his phone, they found a message saved in drafts, never sent. It read, "I fixed it. We're free now." As the scene fades to black, the camera lingers on the house, the garden swaying softly under the morning sun. That night, the narrator says, voice breaking slightly, Daniel Wright didn't just bury his family. He buried every trace of the man he used to be. A single rose petal drifts to the ground. The frame tightens on the soil where the roots grow deep. But secrets don't stay buried forever. The screen cuts to darkness, a pause, then the next chapter's title fades in. When Daniel Wright vanished, he didn't just disappear, he erased himself. Within hours of discovering the bodies, police issued a statewide alert. Daniel's car, a blue 2012 sedan, was gone. His phone was left behind on the kitchen counter, wiped clean. No fingerprints on the doorknob. No trace of struggle inside, just silence, and the faint scent of freshly watered soil. Detective Sarah Holden stood in the backyard, staring at the ground where roses had bloomed just days earlier.
"He planned this," she murmured to a colleague.
He didn't snap. He prepared. By dawn, his face was everywhere. News broadcasts, billboards, and digital alerts. Headlines screamed, "Family killer on the run!" The suburban monster. Gas station cameras caught the first glimpse. Daniel at 3:27 a.m., wearing a baseball cap and a gray hoodie. He paid in cash, never spoke, never looked up. From there, sightings poured in across 3 states. The narrator's voice grows colder, detached. He moved like a ghost, sleeping in motels under false names, using stolen credit cards, trimming his beard every few days to stay ahead of the cameras. Detective Holden refused to rest. She studied every frame of footage, every blurred reflection in every convenience store window. She became obsessed, not just with catching Daniel, but understanding him. Was this madness? Or something colder? A man who believed he'd done the right thing. In her office, she kept the family photo, Claire smiling, the children holding hands, Daniel's arm wrapped around them. To most, it was a picture of love. To Sarah, it was evidence of control. She reread Daniel's journal entries every night. The world will never understand, but I did what had to be done. Each word felt rehearsed, deliberate. This wasn't the rambling of an unstable mind. It was the manifesto of a man who believed in his own logic. Then came the lead that changed everything. A gas station clerk in rural Colorado recognized Daniel's eyes from a wanted poster. He was polite, the man said, almost kind. Bought coffee and asked about the weather. Security footage confirmed it. Daniel, alive, calm, and wearing a cross around his neck that didn't belong to him. Claire's necklace. The narrator's tone tightens. It was no longer a question of where he was going, but what he was planning next. Federal agents joined the search. Helicopters scoured the forests along the state border. Forensic teams traced the pattern of his credit card frauds. Small towns, isolated areas, always within a few miles of rivers or lakes. Detective Holden studied the pattern and whispered to herself, "He's not running. He's waiting." That theory proved right when they found an abandoned cabin deep in the mountains, just beyond a dirt trail rarely used. Inside, a journal, a half-empty can of beans, and a photo of the Wright family taped to the wall. The caption beneath it in Daniel's handwriting read, "Together again soon." Holden felt a chill run through her. The candle on the table was still warm. He had been there hours ago. The scene cuts between real footage and dramatized reenactments, Flashlights cutting through darkness, dogs barking, the sound of boots crunching over gravel, but Daniel was always one step ahead. For every move the police made, the narrator says, he had already planned his next. He left traces, enough to be seen but never caught. It felt deliberate, almost like he wanted to be found. But only when he decided, Detective Holden's obsession turned personal. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping, replaying every interview, every angle. To her, Daniel had become more than a suspect. He was a shadow she couldn't escape. As weeks turned into months, the nation began to lose interest. But Holden refused. She knew Daniel wasn't done. He wasn't hiding from justice. He was waiting for an audience. The final line of the narrator echoes like a warning. And then, just as quietly as he vanished, Daniel Wright returned, not to surrender, but to finish what he started. The music fades into a single, haunting note. The morning Daniel Wright was found, the world felt different, cold, muffled, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. For 74 days, he had been a ghost, a man without a trace, surviving on canned food, rainwater, and delusion. When officers finally reached the remote cabin, hidden miles off the trail, the air smelled of decay and damp wood. A small fire still burned in the corner, barely alive, like him. Detective Sarah Holden led the final raid. Her boots crunched over frost as she raised her flashlight toward the cabin door. No movement. Only the faint echo of someone whispering, "FBI, Daniel Wright, come out!" No answer. They broke the door open. Inside, Daniel sat cross-legged on the floor, wrapped in a tattered blanket. His face was hollow, beard overgrown, eyes sunk deep into shadows. The walls were covered in drawings, childish sketches of his wife and children holding hands, smiling beneath the sun. He didn't flinch as the officers stormed in. He simply looked up, expression blank, and murmured, "They're safe now." When they cuffed him, he didn't resist. He just kept whispering that same sentence over and over, as though it were a prayer. They're safe now. The world can't hurt them. The camera footage from the arrest became infamous. The pale man led out of the woods, head bowed, surrounded by flashing lights and rifles. For the public, it was the face of evil. But for Detective Holden, it was something else, the face of surrender. In the back of the police vehicle, Daniel shivered violently, muttering names, Claire, Lily, Sam. Sometimes he spoke to them as though they were there beside him. "It's all right now, sweetheart," he whispered. "Daddy fixed it." The narrator's voice cuts in, calm, haunting. When Daniel Wright was captured, he wasn't a fugitive anymore. He was a man undone, a mind fractured by guilt, fear, and the weight of his own delusions. At the station, Detective Holden watched him through the glass. The once composed, calculating man was gone. What remained was something hollow, almost childlike. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't fight. He only asked one question. Did they find the garden? When Holden said yes, he smiled faintly and said, "Good, that means it's done." Psychiatrists labeled him delusional, schizophrenic, possibly psychotic. But Holden wasn't convinced. She saw flashes of awareness in him, small, sharp moments where he seemed fully present. When she pressed him about the night it happened, his voice trembled, but his words were deliberate. "I didn't kill them out of hate," he said quietly. "I killed them because I loved them. The world was already killing us, I just stopped it sooner." There was no remorse in his eyes, only peace. News of his capture spread like wildfire. Reporters flooded Willow Creek, shoving microphones into tear-streaked faces. Neighbors wept on camera. Some called him a monster. Others pitied him, but the town itself was never the same. The Wrights' house was boarded up, the backyard sealed off by police tape that fluttered in the wind like a ghostly warning. Parents no longer let their children play outside after dark. The laughter that once echoed through the cul-de-sacs vanished. Detective Holden, though praised for her perseverance, found no comfort in victory. She sat in her car that night, staring at the flickering streetlights, replaying Daniel's last words during the arrest. "They're safe now." What haunted her most wasn't what he'd said, but how deeply he believed it. The narrator's tone turned somber, reflective. In the end, Daniel Wright didn't run to escape punishment. He ran to preserve his story. a twisted version of love where death was mercy and control was devotion. The final scene fades in. The cabin, now empty, rain leaking through the roof, Daniel's drawings fluttering against the wall. A child's face sketched in pencil, smiling. The camera lingers as the narrator delivers the closing line. They called it one of the darkest crimes in American suburbia, not because a man buried his family, but because he truly believed he saved them. The music fades, low, mournful strings, as the screen cuts to black. The courtroom was silent except for the quiet hum of the air conditioner and the faint shuffle of papers. Every seat was filled. Reporters, neighbors, true crime enthusiasts, even former co-workers who once toasted Daniel Wright as a model husband. The man now sat in the defendant's chair, pale and unshaven, eyes empty as the world watched him unravel. Detective Sarah Holden sat near the front, her badge clipped neatly to her jacket. It had been 6 months since Daniel's capture in the woods, but the weight hadn't lifted. If anything, it had deepened. She wasn't here as a detective today. She was here as a witness to horror. The prosecution began with precision. Photographs of the Wright backyard projected across the courtroom wall, the soil, the bodies, the blood-stained shovel. Gasps rippled through the audience. The prosecutor, a woman named Eleanor Grant, spoke with quiet authority. Ladies and gentlemen, this was not the act of insanity. This was control. This was punishment disguised as love. Her words cut through the air like glass. The defense attorney rose, adjusting his glasses. Mr. Wright is not a monster, he said calmly. He's a man destroyed by his own mind, by psychosis, by delusion, by voices that demanded obedience. Daniel sat motionless. His hands were folded in front of him, his wedding ring still on his finger. Every now and then he glanced toward the gallery, perhaps looking for faces that weren't there, his wife's, his children's. When Detective Holden was called to the stand, she hesitated before walking up. Her testimony was clinical at first, the investigation timeline, the evidence, the journal. But as she spoke of the night in the woods, her voice faltered. He looked at me, she said softly, like he didn't even know what he'd done. Or maybe he did. And that's what scared me most. Daniel's gaze flicked toward her for the first time. For a split second, something human flickered there. Recognition, guilt, or perhaps nothing at all. Then came the evidence that silenced the room. The prosecution played a recovered voicemail from Claire's phone, time-stamped the night of the murders. The courtroom lights dimmed and her trembling voice filled the air. Danny, please stop. The kids are asleep. You're scaring me, please. Just stop. A sob broke from someone in the back row. Detective Holden closed her eyes. Daniel's face remained still, until Claire's voice cracked with fear on the last word. Then for the first time, his jaw tightened. His hand shook slightly against the table. The prosecutor turned toward him. Mr. Wright, do you recognize that voice? Daniel's lips parted. His answer came as a whisper. She was supposed to understand. Eleanor Grant stepped closer. Understand what, Daniel? That you murdered her? That you poisoned your own children? Daniel looked down, almost childlike. I didn't murder them, he murmured. I freed them. The gallery erupted, reporters whispering, cameras flashing. The judge's gavel struck, demanding order, but the chaos wouldn't still. As the trial dragged on, expert witnesses debated over his sanity. Psychiatrists described delusional thinking, auditory hallucinations. Others insisted it was narcissistic control, that Daniel understood every choice he made. Through it all, Detective Holden watched from her seat, her thoughts spiraling. She'd seen killers before, cold, calculating, even remorseful. But Daniel was something else entirely. A man who believed his sin was an act of love. When the verdict day arrived, the courtroom was packed beyond capacity. The foreman rose, voice steady. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. Gasps, cries, reporters scribbling frantically. Daniel didn't move. He just looked forward, lips curving into the faintest, most haunting smile. As the bailiffs led him away, he turned once toward Detective Holden and said, quietly enough that only she could hear, tell them I kept my promise. They're still together. The narrator's voice returns, calm, mournful. The Wright case ended with a guilty verdict. But for those who knew him, and those who studied his mind, the trial didn't bring closure. It only opened darker questions about love, control, and the thin line between devotion and destruction. The camera lingers on Daniel's empty chair, sunlight spilling through the courthouse window like a spotlight on absence. The Wright home had become more than a crime scene. It was a symbol, a monument to what no one saw coming. Once the pride of Willow Creek, its white fences and manicured garden now sagged under years of neglect. Ivy crawled across the front door, and the faint outline of police tape still clung to the mailbox. Detective Sarah Holden parked her car across the street and sat for a moment before stepping out. The air smelled of damp soil and old rain, the same scent from the night they unearthed the garden. She clutched a small bouquet of lilies in her hand, unsure who they were really for, the victims, or the broken memory of a family that once was. As she walked up the cracked stone path, the familiar creak of the old gate echoed like a ghost of the past. Each step felt heavier than the last. The garden had grown wild, weeds twisting around what used to be Claire's rose bushes. The swing set in the corner swayed gently, moved only by the wind, one seat empty, one still stained faintly with rust. The narrator's voice carries over the scene, soft but haunting. The house of Daniel Wright remains untouched, as if time itself refuses to move forward. Sarah stood before the patch of earth where the bodies were found. The soil had settled long ago, but the scars remained, darker than the rest, like the ground remembered. She knelt down, placing the lilies gently on the dirt. For a moment there was silence. Only the whisper of wind through trees and the rhythmic creak of the swing. Then, almost without realizing it, Sarah spoke aloud. "You said you kept your promise," she murmured, her voice trembling. "But promises like that don't belong to love. They belong to madness," a crow called in the distance. The sound startled her, though she quickly steadied herself. She turned toward the house, the curtains still drawn, the porch light shattered. Through the dust-covered window, she could almost see the life that once filled it. Claire cooking dinner, the children chasing each other, Daniel smiling with his practiced charm, but that illusion faded as quickly as it came. What lingered instead was the truth, a darkness that had been growing inside those walls long before anyone noticed. Some monsters, the narrator continues, don't hide under beds. They build them. The camera slowly pans toward the backyard, overgrown and uneven. The wind picks up, bending the grass in waves. A children's toy half buried in the soil catches the light. A small red truck, its paint chipped, its wheels frozen in place. Detective Holden steps back, taking one final look. Her eyes glisten, but no tears fall. She had seen many horrors in her career, but this one never truly left her. It wasn't the brutality of the crime that haunted her. It was the deception behind the love that caused it. As she walks away, the sound of her footsteps fades. The swing continues to move, creaking softly, almost rhythmically, as if echoing the heartbeat of something that once lived there. The camera lingers one last time on the soil, the same place where Daniel Wright buried his family, his lies, and his soul. The narrator delivers the final words, measured, sorrowful and unforgettable. In the end, Daniel didn't just bury his family. He buried the illusion of perfection and proved that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones who say, "I love you." The screen fades to black. The faint sound of the swing fades too. The negociant.